Now, Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, but it had a Hindu Maharaja, and according to the terms of the partition, each princely ruler was allowed to decide which country he wanted to belong to. And the Maharaja wanted to stay independent, so he vacillated until the last moment, and then there was an army of Pakistani irregulars which invaded. Nehru sent in his troops, the UN intervened, and we come to the present mess. Now, I've been to Kashmir, and it's a tragic state. One of my great friends was the great poet Agha Shahid Ali, the finest poet, Indian poet who writes in English, although he called himself a Kashmiri poet. We claim for our own, as do the Pakistanis. And he wrote in Country Without a Post Office, he wrote that nobody goes out on the streets in Srinagar without carrying his address in his pocket, because if they're shot dead by the police or the militants, then at least his corpse will reach home. Kashmir has been screwed over by India and Pakistan since the countries became independent. What they want is a form of autonomy. And, as in Israel and Palestine, the overall terms of a final solution are apparent to both sides. I mean, Kashmir is not going to be independent. It cannot sustain itself as an independent country. It's not going to belong to Pakistan. The majority of Kashmiris do not want to merge with Pakistan, but neither are they comfortable with the current arrangement with India. So what is possible is a much greater form of autonomy and some kind of joint rule between between India and Pakistan, and most of all, reunification of the two parts of Kashmir that have been split between the two countries. I mean, the two Germanys have been reunified, and the Kashmiris see no reason why they should be allowed to meet their cousins, just over some kind of artificial line. The Indian position on Kashmir is that if we let Kashmir go because it is Muslim, then on that basis, all these states, I mean, the northeastern states are Christian majority, and they will want to split off and form their own countries. So we can't let Kashmir go. And the Pakistani position is that Kashmir should belong to Pakistan because it is Muslim majority, and after all, India claimed Hyderabad and Junagadh because they were Hindu majority. So it goes back to history, but the people of Kashmir are suffering really badly right now. They're being attacked by the militants and the security forces. But it's not a state that is strategically important to the rest of the world. I wrote an essay a few years ago called A Fatal Love, which was about partition and sort of dealt with Kargil and Kashmir. And we, that is India and Pakistan, need to reach a solution because we've come to the brink of a nuclear war over this issue.
And I'm an English professor, so I'm particularly thrilled about your acknowledgement of the importance of fiction. And we teach fiction and nonfiction in our department, so please do come and take classes there. One of the things that I was curious about, the way you're describing nonfiction, it becomes very much about the individual. And what I'm curious about is how then do you go on from there to tell sort of the bigger narrative? I mean, if you have the moral complexity of the individual characters / people in your stories, how then do you go on from that to tell a story about the Bhopal disaster or about the underworld in Bombay? How do you move from the individual in nonfiction to the bigger story?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I talk about the importance of the individual, I don't mean to say that then the book doesn't need all the other stuff, which is the data, the research, the numbers. It's absolutely crucial to give the readers the background to the human story. So, I'll go back to Bhopal in the Union Carbide story. For several months, I researched the story in Bhopal and then Union Carbide. So I went to the Union Carbide headquarters and I wanted their take on the story. So, I got the data on how many people had died and what had happened in Carbide's official take on it, which was it was an act of sabotage and not an accident. And then I talked about the impact that this tragedy had on environmental legislation in India. I mean, it turned out to have really far-reaching effects on environmental legislation, but not in the way you would expect. So what happened after Carbide was, because Carbide was held culpable by the Indian courts, other chemical companies that came into India after that demanded and received from Parliament an exemption for criminal acts of its local subsidiaries. So DuPont, for example, came into Goa and got a blanket exemption for any possible environmental malfeasance that the local subsidiaries might. In the United States, this same tragedy led to passage of the Superfund legislation. So all of this was in the article, and I went to Carbide because I was looking for moral complexity on both sides. And I spoke for 4 hours to the public relations chief of Union Carbide, who was a former Reuters man. And he told me he had been to Bhopal 18 times since the disaster. And I was really impressed. I said, that's great. You must really have felt for the survivors. So you went there to help them. He said, no, I went there to help the local subsidiary with their public relations. I said, well, but when you were there, surely you must have been moved by the plight of the survivors, and can you tell me some stories? I said, well, I can't remember any specific stories. I said, well, how about the names of any of these people that died or you saw? I said, I can't remember any names. So, well, can you remember any details about them? So some of them seem to have some difficulty breathing. I said, all right, well, can you then tell me, just give me one example of something that you saw in India that moved you, that reached you as a human being, because I want to bring across to my readers the fact that you're not just a corporate slave or public relations executive, that you do feel something. You said, oh yes, there was something. There was this one thing in Bombay. When I got to Bombay, I was staying at the Taj Mahal Hotel, and I was glad to get there because there were all these beggars on the road. And once I got to the hotel, I checked into my room, and it was my birthday, and I was so moved because as soon as I opened the door, there was a birthday cake waiting for me that the hotel had sent out. And I said, this moved you? It's a big corporate hotel. They would have looked at his passport, some computer program would have sent up a birthday cake to his room. This was the one human gesture that he could remember in India. The public relations chief had been duped by a public relations gesture. So I think that detail, putting that in the story, it also illustrates the broader picture of what happens to human beings in large corporations, how we surrender our humanity when we work for some of these corporations, and how this could happen where otherwise well-meaning people who go to church and who are good fathers and husbands could perpetrate an atrocity like this on a small town in India. Oh, not such a small town.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. I was struck by the very sharp distinction you drew between fiction and non-fiction, and the task that you set yourself of describing something. And I was wondering how realistic it is to draw such a sharp distinction between them, in the sense that, is it possible ever really just to describe without some fiction intruding into it? And at the other extreme, is there not some virtue in